Broadcasting live from the Business RadioX studios in Dayton, Ohio, it's time for Dayton Business Radio. Now, here's your host.
Lee Cantor here, another episode of Dayton Business Radio, and this is going to be a good one. Today I have with me David Ramey, and he is with Strategic Leadership Associates. Welcome, Dave.
Welcome. How are you doing?
I am doing great. Before we get too far into things, tell us about your work with Strategic Leadership. How are you serving folks?
Well, the consulting firm, Strategic Leadership Associates, I founded in 1987. So that is, 33 years ago. So we started our 34th year. We were established to help businesses and organizations develop their long-term strategy. So we concentrate on the strategy development issues and then the leadership and the resource capacity to support that. In those 33 years, we have worked with businesses, I think, in every economic sector throughout the United States. I think I've been in all but 2 states of the country. We've worked with government agencies, some large institutions, like the U.S. Air Force and NASA, the space agency. We have helped to create organizations, merge organizations. And I think our core strength is helping leaders and their organizations and their workforce to anticipate trends and issues in the future and to respond to them in a way that promotes their growth.
Now, how does an organization know it has a leadership problem and they got to contact you and your team?
Well, the first contact is usually around a problem they're trying to solve. So we always try to keep that in mind. Every strategy is trying to solve a problem. Like we can't grow anymore. We had 10 years of growth and now we're stagnant. Or we can't keep the high talent of people that we need to keep to be successful. Or we don't know how to get into the marketplaces that we think we'd be successful in the future. So we try to start always with the presenting question or the presenting issue the organization is trying to address. And I think we're pretty good at helping them see that usually that's one part of a much bigger strategy. And also the leadership capacity to get there.
So it sounds like you start kind of from a strategic point of view, but then leadership is a tool that you use to kind of help them fulfill their strategy?
Yeah. So actually we think of the strategy, let's call it the preferred future. That's the starting point, right? What's your preferred future? And then we think of strategy as one tool and leadership as the second tool. And the third tool we think of is the engagement of your stakeholders. So that could be your workforce, your customers. In the case of a school district, that could be your parents and your teachers and your students. In the case of a local government, that could be your citizens. So we always look at that 3-part solution set of leadership, strategy, and engagement, and we usually design what we call kind of an intervention, or we'll call it a plan, so it's less threatening. We design a plan to work with them over time to get there. What we're a little bit unique in is most of our projects are not, we're not in and out the door turnstile consultants. We are really with an organization a minimum of 90 days, sometimes as much as 2 years.
Now, is it something that they have to kind of go all in on, or can they start with an assessment or a small project to kind of see if it's a good fit?
Yeah, we always break what we do into tasks. We call them tasks or phases. And we always give them the option to choose to go to the next phase or not. Usually they do, but sometimes they'll say, hey, we're mentally tired, or we want to see if that's going to work, or we want to conserve our financial resources, so we may go back at a later point in time to pick up on the following tasks. But you're right also in indicating that that first task is always some kind of an assessment.
And then what kind of assessment do you use? Any of kind of the name brand ones, or did you develop your own?
Yeah, we usually kind of customize the assessment process. We look at a number of factors. We look at what we call the key performance indicators. So we try to work with an organization, or let's say a small business, and capture some performance data over time, right? So that could be something as simple, if it's a small business, as revenue over expenses, or one that we like to look at is what we call cumulative annual growth rate. So how inflation aside and price increases aside, how much are you actually really growing organically? So we try to pull together some metrics, performance metrics from their past that will help them get a picture. So that's one picture. The second picture we like to look at is what their employees and customers say about them. So we like to capture that data through some type of survey or focus group, or we call them key informant interviews that help us get a picture of what others might say about the organization. And then the last piece is usually we talk to the leadership or assess the leadership on some standardized tools to help determine that. So we kind of try to take to borrow a phrase, a holistic approach to that assessment, to give them a kind of a 360 look at where are they really starting from.
Now, if we can hold that in one place and then look at those three legs to the stool that you mentioned earlier, it sounds like you're kind of dealing with the corporate culture of the organization. How important is culture when it comes to achieving these strategic goals and kind of creating or helping nurture leaders?
Well, the famous quote is culture will eat strategy's lunch every day. So culture, the organization culture is very important. But while it's very important, it's also a very amorphous thing. I mean, it's very difficult to have the objectivity to sit down and say, this is our culture, and then even more difficult to say, this is how we want to change our culture, right? So if we have a complacent culture, it's very history bound. Sometimes we'll go into an organization and we worked with a major oil company. I probably would mention the name on air years ago. And, when we did those initial interviews, it was my granddaddy worked for this company, my great-granddaddy worked for this company, and so the company had a reluctance to change because they actually had influenced that part of the country and people's history of working there. So culture is hard to get at. You got to break it into pieces that people can get a hold of. Things like performance standards for individuals or setting annual customer targets. One of the things that we think almost every organization we work with does struggle with is we try to get them to identify no more than 10 key performance indicators, we call them KPIs, that actually drive the business. And, when you sit down to do that and say, okay, what really does drive the business? Is it really sales, or is it something else? Is it the number of new customers we get every year, right? Et cetera.
But culture is one of those things that if you're being mindful and strategic about it, it's forming whether you're trying to help it and nudge it along or not, right?
Yeah.
Like there's going to be a culture one way or another. You might as well have some input on what it's going to look like at the end of the day if it's your company.
and as much as you can work to maybe bring that culture along to where you want it to be. That's always the challenge for like a privately held business, is to move that culture along. Major corporations, they change the culture by changing the leadership team. They replace talent, give them golden parachutes, move people along. But if it's a small family-run business, it's pretty hard to change that culture, even if you know you have to. Right?
Now, do you ever come into a circumstance where the leadership is telling you this is the culture, and then you do your assessment and you're like, that's not the culture at all? Like, it's the opposite of that.
Yeah, about 60% of the time, probably.
Really, almost 2/3 of the time, the leaders aren't aware of the culture.
Yeah, well, think of it this way, right? So if somebody said to me, Dave, what's your personality and how would you like to change it? Right? I'm probably not going to be overly eager to identify and disclose all those pieces that I don't want exposed. And then on top of that, to say, oh, and by the way, I've got to change those, right? So very often the feedback that we get from customers and employees is a very significant game changer in getting an organization to change their culture and adapt their strategy. Because usually people hear things that they were not aware of, perhaps, or didn't realize how strongly employees felt, and that can be a pretty dramatic factor.
So now, how do you kind of once, because obviously they hired you to bubble this up, and then you present it to them, and then now they have the choice whether to act on it or not. If they choose to act on it, what are some steps you can do to help them kind of ease into this culture, or to help make some changes in the culture?
Well, we actually take them through a process we call it the second phase, right? So let's say the assessment is the first phase, right? In the first phase, we look at those three dimensions: the stakeholder engagement, what's your current strategy, what's your leadership system, and your predisposition, right? The second stage, we actually help you build the strategy you want for the future. So what we say is, okay, let's set all of that aside that we just learned, and let's talk about, let's paint a picture of where you want to be 5 years from now. So we actually help them construct a very detailed picture of what they want to look like in 5 years. Their sales, their workforce, their approach to market, their product mix. We kind of take that. It's almost like model building. When I was a kid, I used to love to build model cars and model airplanes. So we say, let's take company X here. That's where you are, and let's go out 5 years from now, and let's create the picture in detail of what you want this to look like, right? So that this isn't just some vague image or picture that they can't imagine. We put target numbers, strategies, customer groups, product types. We put kind of all that into that model. We talk about the vision of the company. We talk about what the structure is going to be. So we really create a kind of a then and now picture, right? The now picture is the assessment. The then picture is the strategy in the second phase.
So now, if you do your job well and they have a culture and they have leadership in place that are thriving and growing and empowering their constituents, it helps them, I would imagine, deal with crises that like we're having now. It helps them kind of manage the change that's happening, whether they want the change or not.
Right.
So can you talk about how kind of applying some of your principles help them through tough times like we're going through now?
Well, so I'm going to use, rather than talk about a client that might identify, so I'm going to talk about our business here, right? So 4 years ago, or more, 4 to 5 years ago, I thought that we were too lopsided into, episodic consulting projects, right? Now, again, those episodes could be 90 days in length, or they could be a year in length or 2 years in length. But we were living and dying on the number of consulting projects we could deliver. And I thought, this, in tough times, or a couple of key people get sick, we could be in trouble. I had no idea about a COVID virus or anything like that, obviously, right? So what we did is we said, we're going to create another side of the house for small organizations who maybe don't think they can afford us day to day, but we're going to come up with a way to cut the market rate, to provide them with financial management, literally manage their finances, do their bookkeeping, their accounting, their CFO functions, and their HR functions, so their workforce and their money. And we're going to do it in such a way that they commit to us a minimum of a year at a time, and these become ongoing contracts. In other words, we become part of their team. And we struggled to try to get to a discounted rate that would make that competitive, right? So the competitive advantage we were after was, what if we can give you a talented team of people in HR and finance that you ordinarily couldn't afford, but you didn't need them 5 days a week anyway. You only needed them 8 hours a week, 12 hours a week, 14 hours a week. And we figured out a business model to get them to serve or support 2 or 3 other organizations, so that we kept our team busy, but we could offer that to you at a competitive and discounted rate. And we did come up with what we call the shared service model now. And anyway, the long and short of it, to directly answer your question, so here we are 5 years later, when I think the COVID would have probably put our traditional consulting business out of business, and our shared services basically saved the company. So here we are. We anticipated that we were too lopsided in the way we got our revenue. We needed something more sustainable, more recurring revenue, maybe more retail, you might say, and that worked for us. And we're going to end the year, end 2020, probably where we were 2019. We're not going to make a fortune, but we're gonna still be here going forward.
Now, in your work, you mentioned a variety of different groups and organizations and industries. Do you have a favorite or a sweet spot that you work particularly well with?
We like doing I call them the public projects, things that make the world a better place. School districts, churches, local governments, fire departments, police departments, the kind of entities that really make for a stable society. The other thing that we find about working with those institutions is they tend to copy one another in a good way. In other words, they don't necessarily see one another as competitors because they have jurisdictions that are geographic. So they have more of a tendency to look down the street and say, hey, what's that police department down there doing on the street around community policing, to pick a current topic. And maybe we should, get with that chief and see what he's doing. So you have a chance to have a little bit of a domino effect that way as well. I personally love working with small business owners because, I think we do not appreciate in this country how much effort it takes to run a business. Probably always, but certainly anymore, the pressures on a small individual business owner to be successful are enormous. They got to be marketing geniuses. They got to know technology. They have to worry about security, and they have to sell their product too, So it's a tough world out there. And I think as a society, 60% of the workforce in the United States works for those kind of people. And we don't realize how powerful they are. Plus, in times like this, that's where you see the loyalty come to the fore, right? In this virus type situation, those small business owners, they're sacrificing their wages first and paying their employees, or they're waiting till they absolutely have to furlough people. Whereas the larger corporations, they tend to just be a little more distant and maybe more objective about those things too.
Now, if somebody wanted to learn more and have a more substantive conversation about you and your team and your firm, what's the website?
www.strategicleadership.com.
Good stuff, David. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story today.
Okay, great. Thanks for your time, Lee.
All right, this is Lee Cantor. We will see you all next time on Dayton Business Radio.